All right, well, without any further ado, I'm going to begin, and we're going inside the mind of Vladimir Putin here for 15 minutes today. And the reason I do this is I'm sure if you're even remotely following international politics, you realize this guy's getting a lot of attention. He also takes fantastic pictures. So what I want to do today, though, is you've probably heard about Ukraine, you heard about what he's up to in Eastern Europe. I want us to take a different look. I want us to think a little bit more about what's going on inside the head of Vladimir Putin, who he's reading, who he's having other people read. Like, what does he find interesting? So we can think a little bit more about how he understands the world and what that means for global politics. All right, so let us descend into the mind of Vladimir Putin. All right, I know this is not an exciting slide. But anytime you talk about Vladimir Putin, you got to get some stuff out of the way. I know what you're all thinking, right? You want to see him on the horse. All right, good. He's on the horse. There he is swimming. He just killed a tiger. He's cuddling with some sharks. He's walking away from things exploding. Riding a bear. You can't really see, but he's feeding a dinosaur there, right? I mean, so let's just get this kind of stuff out of our system. So we've seen him on the horse. We've done that. Now we can go a little deeper into what's really playing out in Vladimir Putin. All right, so I've got some quotes here, and I think we've seen a bit of an evolution in Vladimir Putin, and maybe he's always been the same guy, but the way he talks, the ideas that he shares are different. We can go all the way back to 2001, with the first meeting of George W. Bush and Vladimir Putin, and Bush said, "I looked the man in the eye. I found him to be a very straightforward and trustworthy. We had a very good dialogue. I was able to get a sense of his soul. A man deeply committed to his country and the best interests of his country," right? So that was in 2001. By 2014, our Secretary of Defense had looked into his eyes and saw a stone-cold killer, right? So we see some change there. Most recently, as the Ukraine drama has been playing out, Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany had a phone conversation with Putin, and this is a little clip from the New York Times, told Mr. Obama by telephone on Sunday that after speaking with Mr. Putin, she was not sure he was in touch with reality. People briefed on the call said, "in another world." Right? So this is why thinking about who this guy is, what's going on in his mind, I think is very, very, very useful. All right. Before we dive too deep in, we have to talk a little bit of history, right? A little bit of history to appreciate the context that allowed Vladimir Putin to arise. And we have to talk about the Cold War, right? In the end of the Cold War. So the Cold War, for those of you who don't know, was basically the end of World War II until 1989. It was this epic battle of the United States and the Soviet Union. Toward the end, you had Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev usher these two countries out of the tension, out of the Cold War, moving away from nuclear annihilation. Gorbachev was a hero. Internationally, he was a hero. He was somebody who opened up the Soviet Union, made it possible for dialogue. Ronald Reagan in the United States still held as a hero, playing major, major roles. But what's interesting, even though Gorbachev gets most of the attention for ending the Cold War, one of the major players was actually Boris Yeltsin. So as the Soviet Union starts to crumble, we're talking about 90-91, somebody new emerges. This guy, Boris Yeltsin, who says, "out with the old." Gorbachev, this is a famous scene where he comes up to the podium and says, you talk about this and then you go, you're done, right? And this was the symbolic end of the Soviet system. This was gone. Democracy, the free market, that's what Yeltsin represented. Huge, huge transition. Also, Yeltsin and Bill Clinton, they got along so well. Clinton was always laughing with them. Big transition, right? So this is a historic thing, the end of the Cold War. As we in the United States experienced this, it was a moment of joy. It was a moment of excitement. People could not get enough of this. Unfortunately, the experience in Russia was dramatically different. They called it Perestroika. So this transition where Yeltsin takes over, and we'll look just a little bit of economic data here. So this is the Russian economy as Yeltsin comes in. That's not a good line. You don't want to see that, right? And this is sort of interesting as well. All right, so you see economic decline, unemployment rate. Look at this. So unemployment during the end of the Soviet Union, right around 5-6%, sometimes under that. As soon as the transition occurs, all the way up, 25, 26. I mean, huge, huge numbers. I think this is maybe the most telling. Russian life expectancy. women in pink, men in blue. So here we are at the end of the 90s. Look at that drop. So you go, the average Russian male living over 65 down to under 58 years. This is a traumatic impact on Russian society. Imagine what it's like to live in that world, to be a man or a woman in that world where you see this precipitous decline. All right, while all this is playing out, economic collapse, Boris Yeltsin, he's having fun. He's enjoying, he's dancing, he's drinking, and drinking a lot, right? Somebody stuck a hat on him. There was, those of you that are Simpsons fans, during the time, this was one of my favorite pictures. So Homer's having a little bit of trouble, and there's different categories, right? There's tipsy, there's souse, there's stinking, and there's Boris Yeltsin. Different levels. And so as we think about this transition, what Russia is experiencing in the 90s and how that allowed Vladimir Putin to arise, this matters a lot. It's also important to know that Yeltsin chooses Putin. He says, you're my guy. I want you. Putin didn't necessarily have huge political ambitions. It was Yeltsin who sought him out and said, you're going to be the next leader. And so this is what's going through Putin's head as he's coming into power, that this is a terrible, terrible collapse. A powerful country has gone away. One of his most famous quotes from Putin is, the demise of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. We also had 2 world wars during that century that were pretty horrific. And he says, no, actually, this is much, much worse. So we're starting to get a sense of where he's at intellectually. Also, while this is playing out, NATO, so North Atlantic Treaty Organization, during the Cold War, basically it was, like right around here. After the end of the Cold War, it keeps moving west and west and west. So Putin is seeing a country that once was strong, is now weak, and the former enemy is closing in, right? So as he's thinking about all this idea of returning Russia to power is certainly on his mind. And you say, how do you know that, Muck? How do you know that he's really thinking about this? And more importantly, what does that rebirth look like? I think to do that, it's useful to look at Putin's book club. He actually does have a book club. So in January of this year, he sent all of his governors throughout Russia. He said, I want you guys to read 3 books by these scholars of the 19th and 20th century, and all writing about Russia and the historic role of Russia. Let's start with Vladimir Solovyov. He was writing during the first Crimean crisis when Russia was attacking the Ottoman Empire, and he was talking about Russia's role in the world. He says, if you look to the east, it is dictatorial power that crushes the soul of the individual, talking about Asia. He says, if you look to the west, it's fragmented government that causes egoism and anarchy, right? So these extremes are terrible, but Russia will lead the way to human unification. Russia will transcend secularism and atheism and create a unified spiritual kingdom. So this book, Putin is sending out to say we should read this. Nikolai Berdyaev, also an important writer, writing about Russian history, and he talks about the Russian people did not achieve their ancient dream of Moscow, the Third Rome. Right, so he's writing about Moscow and Russia being, so there was the Roman Empire, there was the Byzantine Empire, and there will be the Russian Empire, right? To think about this grand evolution of history. All right, our third guy, Ivan Ilyin. This guy, Putin actually dug up. He'd been buried in Switzerland, and Putin says he deserves to be in Russia. So in 2005, they reburied him. He's apparently Putin's most favorite scholar. He says, we trust and are confident that the hour will come when Russia will rise from disintegration and humiliation and begin an epoch of new development and greatness. We know that Western nations don't understand and don't tolerate Russian identity. So this is important, right? So this is what Putin is telling all of his governors to read, to talk about the reemergence of Russia, the greatness of Russia, Russian exceptionalism. We're comfortable with the term American exceptionalism. There are other authors talking about Russian exceptionalism. My favorite book, this is also on his reading list, and it's titled The Third Empire, Russia That Ought to Be, and it was written in 2006. That's important, 2006, by Michael Yuriev. In this book, it's a fictional book written supposedly in Latin America about life in 2054, looking at what Russia's up to in 2054. And it says in 2054, Russia is a very, very different place. The transition begins in 2000. and there's a period of rebirth from 2000 to 2012, where a leader, and I kid you not, the leader's name is Vladimir the Restorer, reemerges and brings Russia back. Over time, their power grows, and eventually you see the first crisis, the first territorial expansion begins in Ukraine. This was written in 2006. In the story, in Ukraine, there's a revolution in eastern Ukraine. Rebels who are angry with the western shift of Kiev, afraid that Kiev is turning to the west. They have this revolution to overthrow the government. Right in 2006, writing what just played out. Over time, what he says will happen is the Russian Empire will emerge to conquer all of Europe. The book ends with with Russia launching a nuclear weapon, a tactical nuclear weapon at the United States, which hits, and the United States responds, but the Russian anti-missile system knocks it down. That's the end of history. So this idea, what we're seeing here with all these writers is Russian destiny, Russian greatness, Russian emergence. So this clearly matters to him, right? These are the ideas that he's sharing and wanting others to read. The other thing that is important is understanding the more conservative evolution that Putin has gone through. So I'm going to read a couple quotes. Recently he said, many Euro-Atlantic countries have moved away from their roots, including Christian values. Policies are being pursued that place on the same level a multi-child family and a same-sex partnership, a faith in God and a belief in Satan. This is the path to degradation. He also said it's Russia's role to prevent movement backwards and downward into a chaotic darkness and a return to a primitive state, right? So there's a religious element to his speaking today, arguing against feminism, homosexuality, liberalism, multiculturalism, globalization, and international organizations. So this movement back, pulling away from the rest of the world. It's not surprising that Putin doesn't care the world is angry with him about Ukraine. He's playing a different game right now. And what's fascinating is that appeal to Russian greatness, Russian exceptionalism, has domestic appeal. But this element, the conservatism, the religious element, the orthodox, this has global appeal. So for the first time, Russia now, since the end of the Cold War, has an ideology that they can spread. And what's fascinating is that we've seen some ways in which this is appealing. So if we look at recently, there were parliamentary elections in Europe, and we saw this crazy movement where all these right-wing organizations throughout Europe won 25% of the vote, huge movements. They're all somewhat sympathetic to the argument that Vladimir Putin is making, arguing that we need to fight back against multiculturalism, against homosexuality, against liberalism, against feminism, right? We should push back against these ideas, against, religious tolerance. So on the right, we're seeing movement that way. Also seeing it here. I think if you look at some of the messages on the American right, you're seeing the same thing. Patrick Buchanan recently wrote, Putin is not wrong in saying that he can speak for much of mankind. Putin may be seeing the future with more clarity than Americans still caught in a Cold War paradigm. Here we go. Fox News, in a way you've got to give it to Putin. He knows the West is weak and that Mr. Obama will not likely rally against him. So O'Reilly saying that this is weakness. My favorite, Sarah Palin. I'm not going to read you the quote. Let's listen to it.
Obama's, the perception of him and his potency across the world is one of such weakness. People are looking at Putin as one who wrestles bears and drills for oil. They look at our president as one who wears mom jeans and equivocates and bloviates. We are not exercising that peace through strength that only can be brought to you courtesy of the red, white, and blue.
I don't think bloviates is a word. I'm not sure. But so Putin is riding bears. He doesn't actually ride bears. He rides horses. The bear picture is not real. But nonetheless, that Putin is strong and Obama wears mom jeans and is weak. And so you also see some of those comparisons between the religious rhetoric. So I think it's fascinating to think about how this plays out and the global vision that he is trying to spread. The idea of Russian greatness, Russian exceptionalism linked with a conservative religious worldview, which one could argue might have global appeal. I think a lot depends on what happens in the economy over the next 5, 10, 15 years. If the economy continues to putter, if globalization doesn't provide benefits to all of those in the international system, it's likely you'll see more and more who are sympathetic to this type of argument. However, things turn around and we have a much stronger economy, arguments like this don't hold a lot of weight. But it's fascinating to watch, and I think we should first look at what's playing out inside Russia and how the Russian people respond to this crisis, and then look internationally. All right, well, my time is up. Thank you so much.